Hi, I'm Dennis Metzler, and you're viewing The Charge. Noted Harvard historian Annabelle Wexley claims, without hyperbole, that the piano era is the most important cultural movement since the Renaissance. There have been an endless amount of articles, books, movies, TV shows, and documentaries covering the piano era, but they all have one thing in common. They focus on the stars, the big players, the super talented, the child prodigies, the big record deals, the scandals, the big concerts that brought in $200 million for one night. But today, we're going to look at the piano era through the eyes and experience of a typical, some might say mediocre, but nonetheless full-time professional piano player. That pianist is Devin Chandler, originally from Bremen, Indiana, but for most of his life, a resident of Elkhart, Indiana. His mother, Emerald Chandler, was a competent classical pianist and taught many private students over the years. She got Devin taking lessons at age 6 from one of her colleagues. He also played trombone in band up through high school. Emerald says he was only slightly above average on piano as a child, but enjoyed it quite a bit. Devin says that his mother continually pushed him to practice. In high school, he took a few jazz lessons, purchased a few jazz books, and started to listen to jazz recordings. He signed up for the high school jazz big band, where he was able to hold his own, but was certainly not outstanding. According to Devin, "I liked it, but didn't love it. It was certainly not a career goal." End quote. Chandler enrolled at Manchester University in North Manchester, Indiana, on the engineering track. Chandler enjoyed making and designing things, and it seemed like there would always be job security. There were a couple of his uncles who were engineers who always fascinated him with their engineering stories. He still practiced piano a minimal amount and played with friends occasionally, but didn't take it seriously. However, during his junior year at college, a new fad swept the campus and the nation. Everyone wanted to hear piano music, especially classical and jazz. It started with the soundtrack of the blockbuster movie, A Fern for Francis. People were constantly learning the music from the soundtrack and playing it on pianos all over campus. The soundtrack was not only a huge hit throughout the country, but also throughout much of the world. But it went way beyond the soundtrack from the movie. People right and left were just falling in love with piano music, period. Listening to it, playing it, dancing to it. A hunger for piano music seemed to grip the whole world. Any new music had to have piano front and center if people were expected to listen to it. People that never even listened to much music started spending significant amounts of their time and money immersing themselves in the glory of Mozart, Chopin, Art Tatum, and Bill Evans. The world was intoxicated with the compositions of the classical and jazz greats. Piano sales were going through the roof with a significant backlog on orders. According to Chandler, it was so weird you would think that sort of thing would just be a fad for 3 months or 6 months or a year. But there had to be something else, because it just kept going and snowballing bigger and bigger, unquote. You would see pianos where you never saw them before, and you would hear people playing them at all hours. It would be normal for some establishments to have 6 piano players within a 24-hour period. Of course, every restaurant or bar would have a piano, but now in museums, medical clinics, any good-sized store, even post offices, any business that had a decent-sized lobby would not only have receptionists, but also a pianist. You just never knew where you were going to see someone playing piano. There were often special, highly publicized piano performances. AT&T sent up a huge hot air balloon with a 7-foot Steinway in it, featuring Bach and Handel. New York City commemorated the 150th anniversary of the Brooklyn Bridge by hanging a piano on a platform under the bridge, a 9-foot Yamaha Grand featuring Rachmaninoff sonatas. And it wasn't long before the top pianists were making more money than the top athletes. For Devin, the piano movement became very personal. He says, "So, no surprise, I was already a piano player and this thing just took over inside me. You would think, oh, everybody's doing it and you just want to be part of it. But it wasn't like that. It was like all the passion and desire I had inside me for anything or anyone got focused on listening to piano music, and so much more to playing it." Unquote. So, Devin started studying privately with the best classical and jazz teachers he could afford, and he would spend hours a day, every day, practicing piano. He proved at an exceptional rate, greatly surprising his teachers and his mother. Before you knew it, people were hiring him to play for funerals, weddings, private parties, all sorts of ceremonies, you name it. Pianos continued to be on back order because there was such a high demand. Refurbishing and selling old pianos soon became a multi-billion-dollar business. Some people were so desperate to get their hands on a piano that it was relatively common to hear stories of 3 guys driving up to a house with a truck, breaking in and holding the owner at gunpoint in order to steal the piano. Keep in mind, few of these pianos were being stolen to resell. They were stealing them so they could play them. Many people installed electronic homing devices inside the piano so they could track them in case of theft. Unfortunately, wherever there were corrupt police, it was common for the cops to track down these pianos and keep them for themselves or their kids. Chandler did barely graduate as an engineer, but he had lost all interest in pursuing engineering for a living. He deeply identified as a piano player, and his dedication to studying and practicing piano only intensified as he kept getting better and better. His first full-time gig was at McDonald's. Good money and free meals, if you can call them meals. He performed 5 nights a week and was able to save a good chunk of money. After 6 months playing the McDonald's circuit, he signed a 1-year contract to play in the main lobby at the Elkhart General Hospital, right on the river. It was a day gig, and jazz and classical was about all anyone wanted to hear. Devin also had some unusual gigs. He got called to play a gang summit in Gary, where a few pastors were trying to get 2 particular gangs to make peace. One gang leader was adamant about wanting Chopin, while the other insisted on Liszt. Chandler accommodated both of their tastes, and after a weekend of meetings, the gangs did reconcile, claiming that the music made all the difference. There were so many wedding gigs, but what was different now was that playing a wedding started to mean that you also played the wedding night. Chandler never did play a wedding night, claiming, "Too personal for me. I must just be old-fashioned or something." Unquote. Because of that, all the big hotels had pianos in most every room. Chandler remembers walking down the streets in the artsy, craftsy cafe neighborhoods of northern Indiana cities and hearing 5 piano players in just 1 block. He readily admits, "A lot of those players were beyond me in talent, but I was always perfectly able to get all the work I needed." Unquote. The top concerts were something to behold. The best of the best would play in huge outdoor amphitheaters with perhaps 100,000 people in attendance, not to mention all the TV and internet revenue, and come away making $50 million for one night. Chandler knew he would never achieve that level of playing, but he was certainly making more than the average engineer, often playing 2 or 3 jobs every day. He was especially fond of playing the big home improvement stores. They paid well, he enjoyed the handyman crowd, and he was always eager to see sheetrock and especially plywood. One of Devin's favorite gigs he ever played was being on a platform with a 9-foot Steinway Grand, several microphones and several cameras. The whole apparatus was hoisted 20,000 feet in the air by a huge cargo helicopter. On the way up, he played Ellington, Mingus, and Monk. There were 4 parachutes attached, 1 at each corner of the platform. When Chandler was released from the helicopter at 20,000 feet, he played Tchaikovsky as the whole platform was in free fall. At 10,000 feet, the chutes opened, and he played Debussy the rest of the way down. Upon landing, he burst into Sousa's Stars and Stripes Forever. According to Devin, this is the scariest thing I ever did in my life. People who think musicians have a safe life don't know what they are talking about." Unquote. Of course, eventually more and more factories were opened, but there were still often shortages. The old pianos that were beyond repair found many creative uses. People awaiting death's door frequently requested to be buried in pianos. Kids would often have tree forts that were made of them. People would use them for planters in their front or backyards. Closets were often replaced by grand pianos, which functioned as wardrobes for their clothes. The majority of new dining tables were made in the shape of grand pianos. The economy in so many ways revolved around pianos. Many smart investors were making a killing in the stock market, putting their dollars in piano companies. Based on Mount Rushmore, stone sculptors labored for months, carving 4 huge busts out of the rock of Pilot Peak in Wyoming. To the pleasure of millions, the faces of Mozart, Beethoven, Chopin, and Liszt appeared, and it was henceforth named Piano Peak. And after decades of activist efforts to remove Jackson from the $20 bill, his face was finally replaced by none other than Beethoven. And he's not even American. The country was happy. The world was happy. Studies kept showing that during the piano era, married couples stayed together longer. People were more sound psychologically, suicide rates were lower, and there was less gang violence, terrorism, and war. There wasn't a single important event that didn't have a piano player, no matter the circumstances or the weather. Navy ships, nuclear subs, you'd better believe they had more than one piano on them. Airliners had their seating arrangements reconfigured to make room for a piano on all flights. All sorts of political and diplomatic engagements absolutely required pianists. But there were still bad people in the world, and they did the most evil things you could imagine. Several times, when pianos were set up outdoors for gatherings where thousands would be present, terrorists would plant a bomb in the piano. When a particular combination of notes was played, you would have 100 people dead and 500 injured. On another occasion, some dreadful souls pushed a 9-foot Steinway off a 75-story building into a crowd, and 25 people were killed or seriously injured. With obvious grief, Chandler reflects, "You are going to take the most beautiful thing and turn it into the most evil thing. You just can't get any lower than that." Unquote. It was all too common to hear stories about piano crime, drugs smuggled in piano, man bludgeoned against piano, kidnapping of a piano murder, piano bombs, buried alive in a piano terrorism, and assassination by piano. Because piano players were hired to play for any and every occasion, it became somewhat of a controversy among some piano players as to which kind of gigs were ethically acceptable and which weren't. Devin Chandler was certainly one of those whose ethical standards affected his career. According to Chandler, quote, "There were some gigs that you just shouldn't take. I think it was just plain wrong. You were going to play Brahms when some woman comes in for an abortion? Call me judgmental, call me right-wing. I just couldn't do it. But I wouldn't play for an execution either. A capital punishment gig? No way. Call me left-wing, call me commie. The guy is on the electric chair, and you're going to play Chopin's Dark Waltz?" Unquote. Devin was glad to perform in maternity wards for women in labor, and especially the delivery of babies. He was also glad to play for major surgeries, though many pianists found out they were too squeamish for that. Though he would never play for a capital case, he came to realize that he really enjoyed laying down a musical background as lawyers, judges, witnesses, and defendants made their statements. A delight to Devin, the composers from the Romantic era were most in demand in courts of law. Chandler also had friends who would take up to 2 years to get high-level security clearance to play for CIA and NSA secret meetings. They made fantastic money, but that was a line Chandler would not cross. Though the intelligence community was especially keen on Russian composers, much of their work was a moral affront to Devon. There were controversies related to the piano era, and there were dark times connected to the piano era. But people remember the piano era as a time of rejuvenation, prosperity, and joy. Just about anyone you talk to would tell you how pianos were a big part of their lives. What kid didn't want her birthday cake made to look like a grand piano? And what little kid didn't want to be a concert pianist for Halloween? Every teenage guy had grand piano sneakers. All the young people wore piano hats. It wasn't sports cards that were big. Everybody traded piano player cards. But more than anything, it was about the music. People loved the music, like they loved life itself. In Chandler's own words, it was such a deep, pure, euphoric experience. Absolutely amazing. You just touch the keys and you are transported into heaven. Unquote. Today we have explored the history of the piano era with the help of Devon Chandler, a typical, though not particularly talented professional pianist. How do you think the piano era has influenced today's culture? Please leave your answers in the comments section below and let us know what you think. I'm Dennis Metzler, and you've been watching The Charge. Please hit the like button and click on subscribe. Have a great day.